All right. Good morning, everyone. We're allowing a few minutes for people to join us. Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. Um, Thank you for joining us to Your Budget, Your Priorities Community Conversations with City Manager TC Broadnax. Today's meeting is an opportunity to learn about how the City of Austin budget works, to hear more about the current financial realities and challenges, and also share your priorities before the City Manager develops the proposed budget. Before we get started, I'd like to address a few things. Interpretation is available. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be a small globe icon at the bottom of the screen, and you can select that to select the language channel. Tenemos servicios de interpretación disponibles hoy en esta junta. Si quiere participar en el canal de español, si se va a la parte de abajo, debe de estar un pequeño globo de planeta y ahí se transfiere al canal de español, otros lenguajes. The format for today's meeting. So the city manager will share an overview with you about how the budget works, and it will be followed up by a Q&A portion of this meeting. Now, how do questions work? So there is a Q&A tool located at the top of the monitor. You may drop your questions there throughout the meeting, and they will be addressed in the Q&A portion of this meeting. You may also raise your hand, and you can do that with a tool that is located, I believe, at the bottom of the screen. There's a little hand tool. You can raise your hand. And again, we will be addressing these towards the Q&A portion of that meeting. And staff members will call on your name and unmute you to speak. Just a reminder, this is we're expecting a respectful dialogue, and so please work with us as we can address every question that is coming our way. And with that, I'd like to, before we move forward, I'd like to invite Council Member Krista Lane from District 6 to share a few opening remarks today.
Thank you so much for coming today. Should I be pausing for translation or just say what I have to say? Okay,
You're
all right. Thank you so much for coming today. I regret that my video is not working. I am a fairly recently elected council member. I've been in office for a little over a year. And for me, I really value the stage of the budget process where we meet with the community, hear the overview of what the city manager is bringing, and then hear your questions and comments and concerns, as that's just so important for me and making sure that my priorities are oriented in the right direction. So I really thank you for coming. I represent the northern and northwestern parts of Austin in the outlying areas. And my particular priorities relate to affordability and quality of life, and that includes the triad of transportation, housing, and childcare. I focus in particular on transportation, and I'm also focused on public safety improvements. Overall, the through line of what I care about in this budget and in this process is making sure that we are supporting the efforts to find efficiencies and restructure in order to make city services less costly to everyone using them, all of our stakeholders, and also so that we can reinvest that money into the very important priorities of our community and supporting the people who live and work in Austin in times that are very financially challenging. Thank you again for coming, and I really look forward to hearing the presentation.
You're on mute, Lisetta.
Oh man, it is 2026 and I'm still having that mistake. So as I was saying, with that, I'd like to welcome our city manager, TC Broadnax, to provide an overview of the city's budget and the work that is underway.
Thank you, Lucero, and thank you, Councilwoman Lane. I appreciate those words, and that is exactly why we are on this virtual meeting today. I know we've had several out in the community, and this gives an opportunity for those who couldn't make those earlier meetings to actually hear from me and allow me to share some insight on our current budget situation, as well as the path forward to creating the fiscal year 2027 budget. And so, with that, I'm going to get into a very brief presentation, and then we'll save the rest of the time for the questions and answers. And I've got staff online as well to assist me, particularly those in budget in finance, should there be any detailed questions that I'm not able to respond to. And so with that, why don't we go ahead and get started? And so, as you can imagine, these things happen, meaning our budget creation and process of engaging with the community happens every year as we're required to adopt a balanced budget once every fiscal year. And so, as outlined in council guidance, as well as our charter, city manager is responsible for preparing and releasing a proposed budget. In Austin, that occurs in the summer, in the month of July. And so I will be proposing a budget to the city council in July, mid-July. The council then will begin similar discussions as we're having today, but actually on the meat of what I've proposed at the district community budget meeting level. And they'll be out in their respective communities talking about and getting opinions on and thoughts on the proposed budgets, what's good in it, what people don't like so much, and or what's missing. And so they then have those discussions throughout late July and into August, where council then will conduct some formal public hearings to hear from the public, as well as we would hope council will vote on the budget, the proposed budget, and the tax rate changes, if there are any, in the middle of August. With that, once they do that, we will then ultimately move into operating and implementing the fiscal year budget, and that begins October 1st of every year. Should the council, as similar to last year, decide or determine the need and or the manager, the need for more resources than the state allowed 3.5% property tax revenue cap, they would call a special call meeting at the same time in August and adopt that budget that is commensurate with what would be voted on in November. And that November election date would be the first Tuesday in November, typically, which will obviously be a national midterm election. So the process, obviously, last year was much talked about, particularly as it set and foreshadowed what we'll have to experience as it relates to proposing a budget this year. But last year's budget, if we want to go back, because we did call a tax rate election, I proposed as the city manager the budget in July of 2025. Council went through the same process that I spoke about on the last slide, where they reviewed and then ultimately approved a budget that called for a voter approved tax rate escalation, meaning they had to call a special call meeting. The fiscal year began in October of 2025. The vote on the tax rate election occurred on November 4th. And unfortunately, Prop Q, as we named it, failed with a vote of 63% against and 37% in favor. So as a result of that, we had to come back and amend the budget. And the city council did that on November 20th, 2025, and adopted a revised budget that reflected the will of the voters that rolled those resources back. And so that amended budget, once it was approved in November, you'll see here on this slide, it was 1.5 billion. The budget prior to that they approved in October was 1.6 billion. So basically, we ended up, and the council had to go back and adjust the budget with some modifications, but reduce it down about $100 million, which was the anticipated revenue from Prop Q. So as a result, you will see around the outside in blue the services and the departments and their associated percentages of that $1.5 billion. And obviously, police, fire, and EMS are the larger and largest departments that we have and provide public safety to our community. They represent about 60 to 63% of our overall general fund budget. You'll see in the green the revenue associated with our city budget. And primarily, as we often discuss, property taxes and sales taxes are the largest two revenue sources, followed by other revenues, fines and fees, and transfers and others. And then the utility transfers, as you see, standing alone at 13%. I really pause on this slide to really understand and share about where the tax revenues go. As you can see, as we show this budget wheel, as I call it, 100% of all the property taxes that show up and actually we receive go towards public safety, along with about 65% of all the sales tax revenue that we collect. And so, as I tell people, when you think about what your tax dollars are paying for, particularly property taxes, 100% of that goes to public safety, and all the other revenues that I talked about, inclusive of sales tax, that's not going to public safety, but the other revenues and transfers actually fund all the other services that you see on this slide, from social services to municipal court, public libraries, our housing department, homeless strategies, animal services, and as well as our parks and recreation department. So again, we do quite a bit with the city resources that we get, but 100% of our taxes go towards public safety. As we move to the next slide, looking ahead, obviously, as we will be sharing in the next couple of weeks, this is a reflection of the general fund 5-year base forecast that we presented based on the amended and ultimately adopted budget in November. It showed the first 2 years as balanced. Obviously, the current year that we're in, we also then foreshadow a planned budget, which is the budget that we're actually preparing now. We'll go through and make the necessary adjustments based on any revenue changes or expenditure modifications that need to be made. But you would see out in the future, even as of November, we were looking at deficits as it relates to our revenue and expenditures. And so the 2028 budget and the 2029 and 2030 budget all show deficits, one after the other, that you see in red there. So those are the challenges and the headwinds that we're going to have over the next several years. And to the point of the councilwoman, we're going to have to figure out how to get more efficient, probably do a lot more with a lot less, and look at all of our services and begin to have these conversations with the community to see what those offsets might be, should in fact we not have the revenue that we need to move forward. So one of the things as we're looking to prepare this year's budget, that at least at a baseline starting point for us, as you see those stacked bar charts on the prior slide, is we're hopeful just to stay where we're at, to maintain the reductions and the reallocations that were necessary as a part of our amended budget. We're going to be reviewing our social service and other service contracts for potential reductions and or reallocations to higher priority services if need be. We're going to have to take a look at 3 internal transfers that we typically make that fund many of the things that I think people see show up on our streets and in our neighborhoods. We have a capital rehabilitation fund that really deals with the infrastructure around our buildings to ensure that we can get after the deferred maintenance that is occurring. Our housing trust fund is where we fund the bulk of all of our housing programs, and that's a transfer from the general fund into that fund to support the types of things like rental assistance and other things of that nature. And then our economic development fund is supported by the general fund to do things like workforce development and small business incubation and things of that nature. We're already undergoing, as we've shared with the city council and the public, looking to streamline our internal service operations from our information technologies area to our fleet and mobility, to our human resources, our finance departments that support the other departments, trying to ensure that we're optimizing and providing the best service to those entities that actually rely on us inside the city to give them services. And then we will have to look at having a conversation with the council and the public around potential service reductions if need be, particularly as our revenues might be limited. So how that will be done, obviously, are meetings like this, where one, I'm sharing at least the process and hearing from residents on what their priorities are or answering questions that might gain clarity for them to begin to have discussions amongst themselves and the other neighbors around the types of things that the city is doing and what we could be doing differently or getting out of the business of. But I'll be talking with our mayor and city council as I routinely do. We'll be sharing a financial forecast update with the council in the coming weeks. I think April 21st. More community conversations. I think there are at least 2 to 3 more meetings similar to this. These next few meetings will be in person. We've heard from and are going through the recommendations offered by our boards and commissions, which hosted similar sessions with the public, particularly around their areas of focus and what the public believe that they should be advocating and trying to support. And then our own city staff, going through those conversations with them, not just the ones preparing the budget, laying out what they expect can be done, but also our line employees, whether it's service enhancements and or things that they feel we can do in a much better way, and or where their priorities have been and the things that we put in a lot of our strategic plans, which you'll see will be trying to make sure things align with that, the work that our staff are doing and picking and prioritizing which elements to begin to implement and maybe slowing down others. And then again, the social services and all of our contracts, trying to really prioritize the highest needs, if in fact there needs to be any modifications to those things, to ensure that at least if we're going to be paring back, that we are focused on the highest priority needs in the safety social net and other things of that nature. So the future timeline, and I think we'll begin to close this presentation, is, as I said, March 31st was the day we got our recommendations back from our boards and commissions. We'll be pouring through those as we begin to make decisions as staff during the summer. And then we'll be preparing on April 21st for a financial forecast this year. The mayor, with the support of other council members, wants us to prepare that survey in a different format, one that will show living within the revenue guidelines identified by the state, meaning not to exceed the 3.5% growth in our revenue, as well as a forecast that would show if there was not that growth at a zero revenue increase budget, particularly as it relates to taxes, so that the public can get a clear-eyed view of how much additional we're doing with the 3.5% versus if we did not have that and the implications of what that might look like for potential service reductions. Again, as I said, I'll be proposing and sharing with the council July 16th the proposed city manager budget. We'll subsequently come back, kind of go into that with community input and work sessions the following week. And then the next few weeks, again, having work sessions as determined by the council on the areas of focus for them over the next 2 or 3 weeks, if not 4, then hopefully bring mid-August, the 12th through the 14th, forward a budget that council can look at to then ultimately approve and then set the tax rate. And then after their approval, the first day of that fiscal year will begin in October, and whatever resources we are allowed to have to move forward, that's what we will do to operate our budget for that fiscal year that starts October 1st. And with that, I am finished with my presentation. And now I believe we will be navigated through the question and answer session by Lucero and her team.
That is correct. So you can go back one slide to the Q&A portion. Here we go. So just as a reminder, the way to ask questions, there is a little indicator at the bottom of your screen that says raise hand. Feel free to raise your hand just by selecting that button, and a staff person will come and help you, prompt you to ask your questions. If you're feeling a bit shy, there's also a Q&A tool right next to it. Um, if you don't see it visible, you can click on the more portion of it, and there should be a Q&A tool there, and you can drop your questions. So feel free to ask your questions at this point. I do see that we do have a question on the Q&A portion, and I believe Vicky will guide us through that question.
All right, so our first question that we have in the Q&A is from David. I saw a news story that San Antonio's CPS is running a budget deficit. Is there any similar worry about Austin Energy's finances?
So I will attempt to answer this. I don't believe we have at this point had any direct understanding that there are any financial challenges other than your normal expenses and revenue issues. One, to just ensure that our systems, whether it's stabilizing our infrastructure and or all the other needs that come up based on any maintenance for our ongoing operations. I have not seen, and I don't know too much about what CPS's challenges are. But again, I don't think we're having similar challenges other than just the energy business itself and any of the constraints that might be placed on us, as well as just the rate, I guess, sensitivity that we're often concerned about. I'll defer to our CFO if he's got any other comments on that. And you're on mute, Ed. There you go. You're on mute.
I'm good. All right. Thank you, City Manager. Everyone, welcome. My name is Ed Vanino, Chief Financial Officer for the city. And no, we're not. I'm not familiar with the CPS information that was shared, but we're not experiencing that situation with Austin Energy.
Thank you all for answering that question. The next one that we have in the queue is from Katie. Katie asks, is there a plan for another tax rate election in November 2026 or 2027?
So thank you for the question, Katie. At this time, no, at least from my perspective, we hadn't gotten that far in our process to even make that determination. And so, as I said, we've got several months, not just of listening, but also going through our normal process of hearing from our directors, understanding the financial pressures, and then laying out what we might believe would be the necessary balanced budget with the associated prioritization and trade-offs that might alleviate a tax rate election. But that is not at this point anything that I have been guided to prepare for by the city council, nor is it at this point a decision that's been made based on how we're going to go about proposing a budget.
Great, thank you. I also see a couple of questions asking about downloading the presentation. Just confirmed that the slide deck will be shared after the meeting to everybody who registered. So I'm going to skip by those questions. Thank you for asking. The next one is from Catherine, who asks, how will the proposals to purchase public school campuses align with the budget process? If these campuses or other public assets are used to create public housing, will that be at truly affordable rates at or below 30% MFI?
Great question. I think you're speaking to the item from council, I think that was approved last week. And so that particular item didn't specifically direct us to go and purchase any specific school property. It, based on my reading, requested that we coordinate and consider if in fact any of those properties might be appropriate for the city to acquire for whether it's housing or any other public need, and then work and coordinate with the school district to figure out how that occurred. I think there was also obviously an affiliated item that dealt with, I think, when we have joint ownership when it comes to certain parklands associated with any of those types of assets, to actually do that review as well to figure out, again, how we would either retain some ownership and or understanding of the park asset that was there. And so right now, there is no specific, one, resources to go and acquire any properties, but really for us to better understand from the school district when they dispose of properties, whether it's the 10 or so that they're looking at in this particular year or in the future, working better together to figure out, could there be a community benefit that might involve the city being involved in the purchase and or helping transition that property to some private entity to do anything that benefits the community. If there was housing to be created on any one of those parcels and or schools that were closed, I think we would then have a discussion with the city council about one, who would do it, but also the range of housing opportunities when it comes to the, I guess, the um, income levels of the people that we would want to occupy that. I know we've got to focus on now the 40, 50, and 60% MFI related levels to really try to bridge the gap between the 80% levels, which seem to, in some cases, not really be responsive to the individuals in neighborhoods that truly can afford certain types of housing. So I think if hopefully that answers your question. There is no specific uh, property that we're looking to acquire, but just to explore opportunities and options when in fact parcels come available.
So hi, there looks to be another, question from the audience. If we see that it's Susan, you can go ahead and ask a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I actually have a comment. And what I want to ask for is more information for the public during the budget process. For example, last year the city council approved more than 100 million for the caps, the foundation for caps for I-35. And we were told that that money could not be spent on other things like homelessness or other services. So the community needs to understand better what are the spending buckets and limitations. I understand that some of that money was going to be funded by bonds, but I want to understand why that money couldn't be used in other places. If we use the bond money for that purpose, then we have less bond money available for other purposes, partly because of our bond rating and also because the community isn't going to keep approving lots of bonds. So logically, it seems to me that that money should be able to be used for, just as one example. Another thing is when you always talk about the average cost to homeowners, not to renters. Renters make up more than half of the people in Austin. And I understand it's more complicated to say what the cost is to renters because we don't pay property tax. But it feels like you're ignoring us when you don't tell us what the cost will be to renters. So if there's a way to find some kind of average or some kind of calculation, or at least to make us feel like we're not being ignored when you say what the average cost will be. Another concern is certificates of obligation, which the city council can approve without going to the voters. The bonds without going to the voters, but the citizens are still paying for that. So we need more information about the certificates of obligation and what our obligation is, paying the capital and the interest on those. That information is usually not shared very much with the public. And the final thing I wanted to mention is that they're planning to do this new audit by outside auditors, and I haven't been able to find any information about how much that audit is going to cost. And in the past, the city council has not supported doing an outside audit, partly because of the cost and also because the city already does internal audits. So I feel like that's something that was pushed by the city council without very much information to the public about what the cost of that will be. Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for, I think there was 4 areas in your question. And so I know I'm going to need my CFO, Ed Van Edo, to maybe help me on a couple of these, but I'll take a stab at the first part. And so you are correct. I believe last year, I think even preceding the budget process, the city council made the determination to move forward with the elements around retaining walls and others associated with construction along I-35 to actually allow for the construction of those, I guess, strengthening around the retaining pieces of that highway to allow for future caps or decks, meaning parks or other things on top of the roadway system. And they recommended and approved $104 million of certificates of obligation to be used to support that endeavor. And so I do believe during those conversations and processes that we talked about the ultimate trade-offs on doing that, i.e., whether or not that would come off the bond capacity for future bond programs for which they're now under the consideration of doing for the fiscal year 2026 November election is still yet to be decided by the city council. And so we did have that conversation. Council gave staff the authorization to proceed as appropriate to make that commitment with the Texas Department of Transportation. And those certificates of obligation, similar to your third question, would ultimately result in us borrowing money, non-voter approved, for then us to then have to come back and pay for through the voter, the tax portion of your bill that deals with debt service. And so we'd be paying no different than a car loan or a home loan on that $104 million. And so I thought we had communicated that clearly, but if we can always do a better job of laying out the actual cost, the end cost for any borrowing, I think we'll figure out how we do that better. When it comes to how we approach discussing, I think, taxes and impacts, where we show by state law, we have to give and share the impact on homeowners. And we give the example of the median home cost in the city just to really split it down the middle. You're right, we don't talk about renters. Obviously, there's an assumption that every rental property has a similar value, probably more than a single family home. And so I think the property owners obviously understand and feel that, but obviously that is passed through to the renters. And so I don't know how we get at that other than assumption that could be made if the property owners or the renters knew how much the property was valued, just to assume and divide it by the number of units, notwithstanding any other additional costs that go into the operating of that particular structure. I have to figure out and give some thought to that because you're right, we don't talk about it a lot, but there is a natural thought that that would then ultimately be passed on. And so again, if we give an average and or a median, I think the assumption could be made there, but it is a lot of calculations that a renter who has no baseline understanding of their particular property other than their unit, we may need to figure out how we get at that a little bit better, since there's a varied amount depending on the size of a property that can go from 3 units to 4 up to hundreds of units. I think I touched on the C of O conversation, and that's basically non-voter debt, which obviously if people have some concern about not voting, I get it, but it is an allowance to spend those resources on certain kind of state-defined parameters. And so I think you opened up talking about how we couldn't do it for certain types of services, but we can do it for whether it's the caps or anything. There's a list of things that certificates of obligation can be used for. and we're bound by those. They cannot be used for operating related expenses. And so that's why I guess when that's spoken about, that is very clear that we can't spend those bond dollars or C of Os on operating expenses. And so again, I think it's pretty clear, but maybe we can do a better job of sharing at some point, which I thought it was in the back of our budget book, what you can spend C of Os on. But if we can do a better job, we'll try to get there. And then the new audit that you talked about, I do believe council took action several weeks ago to authorize our internal auditor to actually own the process of working with an outside hired firm to do a financial audit for the city. There has not been a cost attached to that. I think the RFP, the request for proposal, just went out on March 30th from our internal audit department out to potential individuals that might want to work with us to do that. Then he'd ultimately have to, our auditor would have to come back, share with the city council how that particular engagement would be funded and request funds during the budget process and or however it is negotiated of how that particular firm would be compensated. I think council obviously understands the financial pressures that we're under, and there also was an associated attempt and or discussion out in the public for that to be put in our charter to have that same kind of audit done every 5 years. And so council, one, obviously didn't believe that it was appropriate in the charter, but felt as if it was their responsibility as well to actually want to do that, given the election that occurred in November and individuals' concerns about how we were spending money and how we might be able to spend it better to avoid future tax rate elections and or tax increases. And so they made the choice to move forward administratively as well as by council guidance for that audit to actually be undertaken. So that is about all I can say to those questions, but I do appreciate you being on the call and the questions that you asked.
Thank you. The next question that we have in the queue is from an anonymous attendee who asks, last year the city budget did not prioritize essential services, primarily fire and EMS services, and many residents felt that the city was holding taxpayers hostage in order to extract more tax dollars. What steps will you take this year to ensure that essential services are fully funded first?
So thank you for the question. I would say I don't agree with the way the question was framed. I do believe public safety was highlighted and prominent in the budget last year. One, as you can see from the slide, it consumed 62% of our resources and all of our property taxes. And so even to the extent that the statement was made that at the expense of and or the tax rate election was, I guess, holding, I guess, taxpayers hostage, I think that probably is an interpretation that I wouldn't agree with either. Now, did we ask public safety to look within their budgets to determine how they could save and reduce their expenditures? Absolutely. We asked every department to do that, and we will do the same this year. And the services that were put into Prop Q were wide ranging, whether it's from homelessness, there was actually resources put in to prevent, in some cases, any reductions that might have occurred in public safety. No different than resources were put in to prevent reductions to social services. But those were choices and recommendations that the council made and gave an opportunity for the public to determine whether or not those resources were needed when they put Prop Q forward. And obviously the majority of the public didn't feel like or felt some kind of confliction and didn't approve it. At the end of the day, if we don't have resources to provide services from public safety to libraries to parks, and people choose to not want to support the resources to provide, then ultimately the city council and our administration is going to have to make some recommendations to have people choose what those priorities are and or agree that we will do and live with less. And so again, I do believe the issues that were in Prop Q were things that not only addressed last year's budget, but council was trying to forego having to go back out every year with the tax rate election. And so they took a large multi-year view to ensure that we, based on the projections, could get through the next 3 years predominantly without asking for a tax rate election to occur. Similar to the very first question that I received around would we need tax rate elections in the future? That was one of the impetuses for putting forth $110 million tax rate election to really support and fund services that we believed we needed to do over and above what we were doing over the next several years. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you. Another attendee notes, I serve on the City of Austin Commission. Every year we present budget requests. Some are more practical than others, in my opinion, given the city's expected funding deficit. What do you look for when you're reviewing our budget requests? How can we make them more meaningful to the process?
Thank you for that. I think the requests that I get and that are receive and review and our teams review from our commissions, in many cases, are often the same types of priorities and things that our departments are desirous of doing, as well as what we've heard from the public as well. And so I would say, I don't know if there's anything that I would change. I think what I would say is if there is clarity around the financial challenges that I believe every board and commission hopefully is understanding of as we talk about this budget more broadly, is that there could be a prioritization in many cases of what those recommendations are to allow us to at least, if in fact there's an opportunity to consider them if they're not already being put forward by our departments and under consideration, that we at least know the priority of them so that at least we can make decisions based on some of the guidance of the commissions who have heard from the public and or understand those particular areas of interest. But again, I think no different than the public consumption that we're doing now and continue to receive through all of our surveys. Most of these things are things that, one, we've either heard before or that we would agree would be worth doing. It's just really a matter of prioritization and the ability to fund them and support them.
Thank you. Eric asks, we've seen cases where small neighborhood projects like signage or minor improvements cost multiples more when routed through city procurement compared to private delivery. Do you have insights on why this gap exists and whether the city is exploring a more streamlined pathway for sub 50K or neighborhood-led projects?
No, I think our procurement processes and whether they're internal and or required by the state to do an RFP are meant to find ways to get the best bang for our buck through competition. And so we do that. I work continuously to try to streamline to at least all the back end things that delay and cause increased costs internally. We try to make every effort we can to do that. Again, I'd have to probably know specifics, but at the end of the day, we've got guidelines around wages that need to be paid for contractors that we hire that have been set by policy of our city council. And so I think people and the cost associated with what they present to us have to comply with all those different things that our council wants to ensure, particularly as it relates to them protecting not just our city workforce when it comes to how much they're paid, but the anticipation that contractors out in the community deserve similar fair wages and pay. And so that could be some of the costs that you see that is different based on the fact that they are spending and would be spending or receiving taxpayer dollars. We want to ensure that we're supporting living wages for any contractor that does work on behalf of the city in lieu of our own city employees.
you. The next question, and I think after this I'll start to rotate with Saul. Next question is from one of our LGBTQ commissioners. She says, many thanks TC and the entire CMO team for hosting this virtual workshop. We're currently operating with a loss of $800K for HIV, STI, and MPOX funding for Austin Public Health's partners. This life-saving funding is missing in this current fiscal year as a result of decisions made last budget preparation cycle to funding to a TRE that lost at the ballot box. How is the CMO team preparing to restore the $800K for HIV, STI, and MPOX funding for APH's partners?
So I can't speak specifically to any particular service. I know that was a big hit for us last year with all the changes and grant reductions at federal levels. Most of our health department, or quite a bit of it, is funded through grants. And so we've had to make quite a bit of adjustments and prioritize.
No sé si puedo hablar en particularmente de un servicio, pero nosotros estamos viendo las prioridades en los departamentos y cuántos de los departamentos reciben recursos.
So we've had quite a few reductions there. And so we'll be working with our health department this year to prioritize where those gaps are existing now that we've got a full year to prepare, and things have kind of settled down in their grant world to figure out and elevate and fund those things. One, ensuring that we're doing it at the level the city proper as the health authority needs to do, and then that extends then out to where we rely on those services to be provided by our nonprofits and others that actually may be a little closer to the public. And so we'll be looking at that. I know health is always a big concern of our city council, and that's back to us prioritizing and reprioritizing where we spend monies in the social service space. And health is not anything that would be excluded from that.
And then we have two similar questions, so I'll ask them together. One is what potential service reductions are being considered at this time, and the other one is from Rich, who asks, you mentioned budget reductions. Does that mean laying off staff?
So that is part of our process, this budget discussion today. None of those decisions have been made yet. Actually began to have my first meetings with the departments in the next week, if not two, to begin to go through their priorities and begin to figure out as we come off of sharing our forecast with our city council, what revenues we actually have to work with based on the first 4 months of this year and us changing any of our projections. And so can't give you answers to those things at this point because I actually haven't gotten into the room yet to lay out what our challenges are specifically and what our needs are that have changed from last year. But again, we'll be doing that between April and late June as we prepare a budget. And so can't commit to anything other than it's going to be a tough year. And I'm going to try to make sure that the community is very clear on what we're able to do, the decisions that we've had to make that impact what we won't be able to do, and all the things that we wish we could have done if in fact the revenues existed. And then we'll have a conversation with the city council and they'll have to make similar choices to make adjustments after they again hear from the public during the summer. But all those things are very concerning to me. Service level reductions are nothing that any city manager wants to ever propose or recommend, as well as reductions in staff, particularly those positions that have people working and doing great work for our public.
Thank you.
Vicki,
Go ahead.
Let's get one of the questions from the audience.
Perfect. I think I see Monica has her hand raised.
Yes.
So Valerie will ask Monica to unmute.
Good morning. Well, it's still morning. Thank you again for testing the waters with this virtual conversation. And thank you for the interpreters that I know are online. That's a lot of hard work they do. So thank you for making sure that they are part of this. I just want to bounce over a couple of things that I already posted since there's no chat. My comments are in the Q&A as well. But I want to reflect on something that somebody said about not prioritizing essential services. And that relates to what I said in a comment about public safety. Public safety is not just the police, the fire department, and EMS. While they are important, they should not collectively or individually for the police department be getting the lion's share of the budget. Public safety is also about public health, mental health, um, health in general, and other special types of health, such as HIV and other specialized medical needs. Childcare services. I know the city has passed on a lot of stuff to the county, but there are still people in economic development who do work regarding childcare. You know, I liked hearing Councilmember Lane saying that childcare is a priority, and I hope that is true for at least five other council members when it comes time to vote on the budget. I mean, I want to remind folks that if people don't have childcare, they can't get out there to work. If they can't get out there to work, they cannot pay their bills. If they cannot pay their bills, then they're going to end up looking for assistance, public assistance, rental assistance. The answer, well, those are both needed, rental assistance, public assistance, all of that is needed. But when you address it at the front end with social service contracts, then that starts to lower the other end. Be proactive, not reactive. Again, about renters not paying property taxes. I said it. Thank you, Manager Broadnax, for acknowledging it. We do pay property taxes. I've been a renter for more than 30 years. I currently rent a condo. I know how to look it up on TCAD, the appraisal district. So I know how much my landlord is paying. And I saw when my rent jumped, it was tied to their property tax jumping. So yes, we pay property taxes. And then about Prop Q, while I have nothing substantial to support this, I do know from speaking to a lot of people, both in the city and outside, voters voting it down doesn't mean that those issues tied to the TRE didn't matter. On the contrary, what they were telling the city is we can't pay anymore. We are struggling as it is. But everything that was tied, or almost everything that was tied to the TRE, those are both basic and critical needed services. Childcare, supports, legal services, mental health services for our immigrant community, especially in this current political climate. We urge you, GAVA urges you, the Community Investment Budget Coalition, of which we are part of, urges you, you need to take a step back, look at the social services that are on the chopping block. Look at what you have that isn't on the chopping block. I mean, I know departments have vacant positions. If there's nobody in line to fill it, no posting done, close it out. Move the money somewhere else. And I worked for the city, granted it was only about 6 months, but that was long enough to know how things operate on the inside. I also have good rapport with a lot of people at the city. Many are champions to what GAVA does, to the community at large. We urge you, listen to the community that really needs those services. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Guzman. And one, I'm not sure if there was a question in there, but I appreciate, I think all of the sentiments around mental health, public health, childcare, alternative response to policing, all those things being additive and or being able to be qualified as public safety. And so I don't think you're wrong there. What I would say, particularly as it relates to at least my focal point when I spoke of the lion's share of where our resources go to public safety, there are but four things that a city has to do. Public safety in those three areas are three of them, and then ingress and egress, public works, and other things of that nature are the things mandated for cities to do. All the other things we do make a city for people and protect and ensure that people's investments, whether in their businesses or their homes, can actually be meaningful to them. And so, where I would say we may differ philosophically is all those other things are great, but you don't get to leave your house and go to work if you believe it's going to be broken into every time you leave, and then the expense associated with fixing and repairing it as it relates to it being damaged, because again, there is no sense of public safety in the communities, economic development, and the things that actually add resources and value to actually produce taxes to actually then provide the services that I think you believe and I believe are much needed in our community come from businesses and others feeling as if they can put a stake in the ground and actually operate a business safely to actually provide resources and products to the public. So it all starts with public safety, whether that's police or EMS. When folk are in need, we got to answer the call and come. And then when we don't, then folk will tell us that we should have come faster or we should have come when they called. And so again, I can appreciate it, but that's back to understanding the fullness and vastness of what a large urban city has to do. And we've got to provide basic services that people actually, when they write their tax bill to us or their check, they expect certain things like the lights to change from red to green to yellow, from stop signs to be up, from parks and rec facilities to be maintained. So we get it, understand it, but at the end of the day, we've got to find a way to do and balance all of those things, and we will, and we have, and we're actually funding many of the services that actually we're looking to be enhanced as a part of Prop Q, and so we've not turned our back on that. But fundamentally, the things that we've got to do that actually the 15,000 employees that we have that show up to work every day to do, we've got to ensure that we shore those things up, I would argue first, and then figure out what we're going to do outwardly to involve and engage our community to do the work that we can't do, to get into the places that may not feel comfortable with us coming and doing. So again, I appreciate it. That's why I think we're having these conversations. And I wouldn't say that folk didn't vote for Prop Q because they didn't like the things in it. You're right. There is financial pressure on everyone that is in this city that lives here or rents here and or owns a home. And that's really, you're right. That was an overriding factor. But at the end of the day, no more revenue is coming in. So we can't sit in 2027 and not think that costs didn't go up, that then we need to figure out where we could actually cut back to actually do the very things we were doing in 2026 with less. And that's what this discussion is all about. And those will be the challenges that I think we've got to all take under consideration going into next year. So thank you so much. I appreciate your efforts and advocacy for people who don't have a voice and for who don't understand and know where to show up to give and let their voice be heard. Thank you.
So the next question is from the audience. I have Tisha. Go ahead and unmute.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Can you all hear me just fine?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm Tisha Vanik. I also serve on one of the commissions, boards and commissions here. And Mr. Broadnax actually come from Dallas as well. And one of the things that I would mention whenever people mention your name is I recall how you were community centered, but also business forward. And that's the way I always thought of you. I helped to develop the volunteer program at the Animal Services there in Dallas. So to bring that back. But now I'm serving in another capacity here in Austin and earn my Six Sigma through your program there in Dallas as well. So questions about many things happening here in Austin. And the question I have specifically is when we think of priority areas, and I know you bring that up a lot, is I'm curious about which priority area you feel brings the biggest ROI to the city of Austin. I'm really curious what returns look like to you, even to the CMO team, as fiduciary responsibility agents here in Austin. And before I say that, I have a quick caveat that I just want to point out because we love to talk numbers and cents. And in 2018, HUD did a survey and it found for unhoused individuals, would cost the community $40,000 annually versus $12,000 for housed individuals. So when we think of that disparity in terms of funding, that could be diverted, redirected into the social programming that Monica and others have already presented that were recently cut and are already strained. It makes me wonder how do you see priorities as investment returns, and where do those exist sort of in your space? Thank you so much.
Well, one, thank you for the question. And so you kind of started on where I believe, and again, my priorities and the community's priorities and council priorities, one should always align because I am responsible for finding a way to try to meet the needs of the community as well as be responsive to the council and their policies. So I don't have a specific agenda. I'll tell you, I guess, when I look through the lens of, as I see the priorities of how I would channel and focus on resources allocations here, based on my understanding, having been here 2 years, and obviously what I hear from colleagues is you started with the one that I think homelessness and housing, one, affordability, and connecting that back to homelessness if that took people there and or getting them housed, I think is and has been a priority of this council and something that I think every city needs to be focused on, and it is a priority of mine and one here. And because of the ripple effects of all of those things, followed by, quite honestly, as you've seen at least, or if you've not read, public safety, which again, that takes a lot of different avenues. And I don't believe it's all about guns and badges and or fire hats or EMS uniforms. I think there is a community centered piece of that that I believe alternative avenues to that, whether it's from comfort and or just from desirability, should be explored. And we did that again in Dallas on both sides of that coin. And then economic development, to be honest with you, which again, as you think about the financial pressures on our taxpayers, economic development and new items put in the ground and or redeveloped, actually, in many cases, that is not counted against us and actually can support and provide additional resources for extending services and or filling gaps on services that we're not able to do with our existing revenues. And so those would be the priority pieces. I would say when it comes to the impacts of any of those things and priorities back to the social service front, I think there's, again, a different interpretation. I think the feeling and result may have been that we reduced social services in last year's budget. I would probably, from a apples to apples standpoint, say we reallocated social service funding to other higher priority social services, namely homelessness, and in a small amount to EMS, which again was actually doing non-traditional EMS layering when it came to our MCOT related services, where we're dealing with high acuity individuals that typically in some cases are homeless, and being able to respond to them in a different manner. The actual social service bucket wasn't in the proposed budget or even as a part of Prop Q, which added more resources to it, was not reduced. We actually took money out of our reserves last year at my recommendation to avoid dismantling within a month and a half or disrupting social service providers who were doing services for us, to give them a 1 year understanding and head start on the fact that if we didn't get more resources, which Prop Q was going to provide, or we didn't figure out another funding source, whether philanthropic and or through any other means, would ultimately be facing a 15 to $16 million reduction because I couldn't spend the money twice and wouldn't recommend going back into our rainy day reserves to fund ongoing services. That was our effort last year to give nonprofits and social service providers the opportunity to retool, whether it was their mission, their expectation, revise their budgets, go out and seek more resources to give them a head start on figuring that out and not understanding what was going to happen a year from July of 2025. And so, again, I think this conversation around social services is great to have, but we began to have it and share it last July. And so, not a lot has changed other than more revenue constriction and more needs and more shortages, whether it's sales tax or other types of things. And so, again, we're going to have the conversation again, but it should not come as a surprise that ultimately we don't have enough revenue to sustain. And in many cases, a lot of the revenue that was providing many of those social services were not general fund to begin with. Services we were providing, some of them were from ARPA dollars, federal dollars, or CARES Act dollars, that when we began to fund them, I thought, and I understand my budget office tell me because I was not here, that we shared we would not be able to continue those services once the resources were gone. And so as people begin to worry and are concerned and talk about what we should be funding out of the general fund or some other means of revenue from the city, I just want to make sure we, at least if that was said, we roll the tape on what was said and what should have been expected before. And again, the city is not just expected to continue services that we never had resources to do, and or it may not be an appropriate use given all the other challenges. And so again, I always am concerned about the least of us and what is not being able to be allowed for and provided for those who cannot provide for themselves. But again, I think that's why we're having this conversation. That's why, again, as we talk about priorities, it's important for me to hear from our community and council. But you can't say you want X and I don't have the resources for it and not being able to understand that or being willing to tell me where you would trim it down, because you got to do that in your own private lives. And I'm not saying you specifically, I'm saying the public in general. And so, again, I think we're all going to have to go through those conversations this summer. And not that I'm looking forward to it, but it's one that we've really got to wrestle with because the state is not providing us any more flexibility to generate revenue. They're actually going to make it harder for us going forward. And so tax rate elections and other types of things might be things that we're going to be having to look at over the long haul. So thank you again for the question.
Okay, I have one more hand in the audience. Katie, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi there. I asked the question earlier about the tax rate election, and one, I want to just appreciate that we're having these conversations. I think they're really important. Thank you for listening. I wanted to share my experience as a staff member of a social service provider. Last fall, we went to the mandated training for all social services providers from the city. And it was in October, and there really wasn't any attention given to or worry from the city staff about the fact that Prop Q may not pass. The only thing that was mentioned was a couple open positions may be taken down because if it doesn't pass. And so there wasn't a ton of alarm bells for me as the manager of the contract that we have with y'all. And then, of course, everything unfolds. And I actually had a contracted staff member come up to me and say, I had no idea that this would affect us. I voted no because I didn't understand what was, I just saw property tax, of course. So there are a few things there that I think we can learn from going forward. I consider myself extremely tapped into what's going on in local policy and government. There's also a fine line that I can walk as an employer in terms of how to keep our employees involved in what's going on and what's on the ballot. And obviously, yeah, there's just obviously things that we can and can't say to employees about that. But I just think there was not enough information given to, or enough runway, I guess, given to city residents, in particular, social service contractors. And maybe that wasn't known before, that would be something that would be reduced, but going forward, that communication absolutely has to be so much more clear and so much more consistent. Thank you.
Well, and thank you for that, I guess, awareness. I would say, from a staff perspective, I might be able to see through why they didn't believe there was a direct impact because it might have been perceived as it was additive. I think there was a slight adjustment made in November in the amended budget that actually impacted at least the original baseline budget that did not have any social service modifications in it, when in fact, because of Prop Q, at least as I saw it, and then my recommendation on the amended budget, there was clearly some higher priority areas of focal points in that amended budget, one of which was homeless services and some issues and challenges around some of the providers and the impact on supportive housing and some of our wraparound services that were going to occur imminently, that we made the decision as a part of the amended budget, and council ultimately approved it, in addition to some other ads, to take money out of the existing pot, for which was held up and funded through our stabilization funds or reserve funds, to really shift some of those. And it did impact across the board, save a few operations that were providing services for us. It did result in some cuts of 5 to 10% for some. And so that was unexpected. So rightfully, I think our staff internally might not have expected that, because that happened and occurred after Prop Q, basically elevating some higher priorities that council wanted to resolve as a part of that amended budget. And so as it relates to, I think, not the narrative, but how the city could have provided better insight or clarity for folk who were already hearing a lot of messages from an outside group that was against Prop Q. Understanding, simply from the city standpoint, we're very constrained by state law on what we can do as a city to, I hate to use the word advocate or promote anything within an election window. We've got to be silent, and we can only provide facts and information, for which was interpreted this year as, well, that's what the budget is, and what we provide and would share what could be done with those resources, which I think we got out there, which was the line item related levels of what was in Prop Q, but we couldn't, beyond just telling you what it would provide, basically go out and make the sale to educate people about the trade-offs and or what's not going to happen, because that would have been seen as electioneering and would have been a violation of election laws. And so that's why groups form to go out, take information that they may see or that we provide to them, and then they go out and do that, whether for or against. And so we were very limited in what we could do, and there was a lot of misinformation and actually inaccurate information being put out that, again, did not lend itself for people to maybe want to go out and support this, because at the underlying, as you said, reason for some people, it was about affordability and paying more in taxes for, in some cases, what they were unclear that actually was going to be a direct benefit to them. And so again, I think your point is well taken. And I would say you cut the people in health a little slack, because there was a shift that no one expected post Prop Q that resulted in some impacts on some of our social service providers and their existing contracts.
Thank you. I think we just have time for one more question, and thank y'all for being so engaged with the questions. We have two that are similar, that are how involved will affected employees be in the streamlining of city operations? And the other one's also, is there a timeline or dates available for city staff engagement or an intention to specifically engage operational staff because they typically cannot attend these meetings when working in teams or in the community? So asking around how city employees can be involved in this process as we're looking for ways to improve efficiency and think about how we work better. What's your vision on that?
Well, one, I always value the input from our staff, whether on budget or in general about their working conditions. Obviously, we've had several processes early in my tenure here related to frontline focus, me being out talking with employees about areas of concern, even in small groups and large groups. I will actually have to think about, as I'm hearing more, particularly with all of the optimization work we're doing and the realignments and looking for efficiencies, how to create a opportunity, whether that's online or some kind of suggestion box, or me getting out, which I think I had already planned, but not specifically around budget, that I may be able to spend more time and my budget people spend more time hearing from people. I'll have to actually think about that. I think that's a good thought because I hadn't thought that probatively until probably about 3 days ago when I first heard that being suggested. But again, I think it's worthy of me and my team considering how best to do that, particularly if folk have input directly as it relates to how to improve whether it's processes and or how to maybe not do certain things or unnecessary steps that are actually creating inefficiencies in the organization. I have to think about that one in all honesty, but I appreciate you putting it in my head.
I do have one more question from the audience here. Let me let Robin know she can go ahead. Robin, can you hear us?
I guess Robin must have heard Vicky to say that that was the last question. I don't know what's going on.
Robin, you may be able to unmute.
I tried.
Or
Give her one more chance.
Okay, I think we will go ahead and move along. We do want to thank you all for your thoughtful questions today. We hope this conversation has been helpful. You've had the opportunity to ask the city manager questions, but before we wrap up, he has one for you. So if we can go to the next slide, there is a QR code. The city manager would like to know, what do you think the city should prioritize in this year's budget? And the way to activate that is to utilize your phone and pretend you're taking a photo of the QR code, and it will prompt you to a page where you can answer that question. Your answers are very helpful to identify what is a priority to you. I do want to thank you, primarily audience, everyone participating and attending today, for taking the time of your day to attend and ask your questions. I do know we tackled quite a few questions, and um, we had even staff, finance folks helping us in the chat, and we have a director of budget and organizational excellence also taking some of the questions. So I know there was quite a few answered, and some may have gone unanswered, but engagement does not stop today. There is still an opportunity to attend 2 more in-person meetings. They will be our last 2 meetings. I believe there is a prompt on the chat that's being dropped with the additional dates. And so please please join us. Join us and continue participating, continue engaging. We'd love to see it coming. So once again, thanks all the staff. Thank you for attending. Thank everybody for supporting the virtual space. And thank you to our city manager for taking the time of answering all of these questions. And with that, we will wrap up today's meeting and hope to see you in the next coming ones. Have a good evening, afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. I'll be closing the webinar now.